Elina Reddy. Welcome to Russian Influence. The guest of our show today is Tim Cope, who is an adventurer, author, and filmmaker. He studied as a wilderness guide in Finnish-Russian subarctic. He has ridden a bicycle from Russia to China and rode through Siberia to Arctic Ocean. Today we will be exploring the motivation and story behind his 3-year, 10,000 kilometers journey across the Eurasian Steppe with only 3 horses and 1 dog for company. We are on our way to Tim's mother's estate in Gippsland, where he grew up. Tim, thank you so much for being a guest on Russian Influence. It's such an honor for us to have an Australian person who was born in Australia, raised in Australia, but being so fascinated by Russian culture.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Очень приятно.
Очень приятно. So, what made you decide that you wanted to go on this epic journey?
Well, it started when I was 19, and I was very fortunate to find a way out of my law degree. I was studying in Canberra, and I'd already fell in love with travel, and for me studying law was a little bit like living a death in life, if you like. And I was lucky enough to find this course to study as a wilderness guide in Finland. So I went to Finland and I studied for 1 year, and part of that course was 3 months practical studies in Russia, in a place called Petrozavodsk, which is a little republic called Karelia. Now, growing up, I'd probably known nothing about Russia, and this whole other world opened up. And as we were talking when we first met earlier today, 1998 was a very interesting time and a difficult time in Russia, and there was something about that chaos, very different culture, and the sheer enormity of Russia. And what I hadn't, and what most people don't understand about Russia, is the sheer diversity of cultures within it, the number of republics and peoples. And I just knew that I wanted to explore it and know more. So I began to learn Russian language myself. And by the time I finished this course, I decided with my friend that, well, we're going to ride bicycles across Russia to China. And at the age of, at that stage, 20, I guess anything that broke away from the conventional norm of life was appealing. And the more people told us that it was too dangerous to travel in Russia, the more we wanted to do it.
The more attractive it was.
And the more we wanted to prove to ourselves as young men that we could live out this dream. To go back a step, when I lived in Finland and studied there and went to Russia, I became fascinated by all these different cultures right across Eurasia. The cultures that are, for example, connected to the Finnish people in Karelia and Udmurtia. I learned about the connections between the people of the steppe and who are, of course, under Genghis Khan, the Mongols had ridden through all these areas and created the largest empire that's ever been. Anyway, we had to cross Mongolia by bicycle at the end of our journey, and I was just completely awestruck by these horsemen and women that would come galloping out of nowhere. They'd usually offer us a little bit of dried curd or maybe a swig of fermented horse milk, and then off they would gallop, leaving us in the dust. And it left me feeling like these people have freedom, they live in the natural world, I want to know more. And so from that point I decided, I would love to ride a horse just like the Mongols once did, from Mongolia to Hungary. And the only problem, one of the main problems, was that I couldn't ride a horse. But that, I guess it was a sequence of events.
It was very brave and courageous, because you went from Mongolia via Kazakhstan, via Russia, Crimea, Ukraine, Carpathian Mountains, and ended up in Hungary, and it took you over 3 years.
I guess, as they say, the luck favours the brave, or the naive. And I think, had I known how many difficulties lay ahead, then I may have never started this trip, and there is definitely a virtue in being a bit naive.
Well, the sun's finally come up, and put the saddles on, cooking some brekkie, and it's cold. It's a little bit chilly anyway. Well, as usual, it's taken me about 3 to 3.5 hours just to get the horses packed and get ready. And when you look on the map and just see how bloody far it is to Hungary, I've got to tell you, sometimes it's just a little bit mentally devastating, because it just takes so much patience, and that's probably the one big thing I'm trying to grapple with, is just patience, because you only travel 30-35 k's a day maximum. The horses often misbehave. Every day something has to be repaired, something goes wrong.
I don't regret any of the journeys for a moment, but it did prove to be both harder and more interesting and rewarding than I could ever have imagined.
We are on this beautiful property where you grew up. Your mum has kindly invited us in to conduct this interview. Please tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I think growing up in the countryside, this was the only world I knew, and I vividly remember the adventures I had as a kid. You know, going over these paddocks down here and catching little fish in the stream. I remember walking up and down the road and having a personal relationship with every single tree. And over the many years of going to school, coming back and checking in on those trees each and every day. And so everything in the environment here, for me, was full of wonder. And it was a microcosm for the vastness of the world that lay beyond. I grew up as the oldest of 4 kids. My mum was a school teacher, my dad was a school teacher and then a university lecturer.
Tim was really inspired by all the adventure outdoor activities and places that we visited. We did lots of bushwalking and camping and spent a lot of time at the beach and in the bush. And Andrew did lots of exciting things with his students, skiing and sea kayaking and bushwalking and that type of thing. So the kids got to join in with the students. Yeah, they were very fortunate to have that. And when Tim was in year 11, he had the opportunity with school to visit Nepal, and that really opened his eyes, and he saw, further horizons. Well, we always had lots of animals, and it's interesting that Tim's, particularly his horse trip, involved the care of so many animals. So I'm not sure if subconsciously sort of that was ingrained in him. It wasn't obvious when he was young. I think maybe his siblings enjoyed the animals more than he did, but his caring was just amazing.
Tim, why were you intrigued by Genghis Khan?
Well, I guess growing up in Australia, in our history lessons at school, we learnt nothing about the Mongol Empire. And when I went to Mongolia the first time, it struck me that Genghis Khan was a nomad. He was a person who lived on a horse until the day he died. And that is incongruous with the image that most of us have, I think, in the West of empire builders or emperors and leaders. I think we have a fairly calcified concept of leaders being someone sitting on their throne in the Roman capital or something like that. And I thought, well, A, there's so much more to nomadic culture than meets the eye, and B, why don't we know more about this? I wasn't interested so much in retracing the warpath or the conquests of the Mongolians. It was about getting into that culture and looking at the world from through the prism of their culture.
Tim, you were hoping to find out what it's like to be nomad, so do you think you've successfully achieved your dream?
Yeah, I think from a bumpy start, I mean, on the 5th day of the journey, my horses were stolen, and
Whoops!
It was a steep learning curve. In retrospect, it was probably the best thing that happened to me, because I had to break out of my own little dream world and start getting a grip of this very different culture. And there's this wonderful saying that they have in Mongolian, which means something like a person on the steppe without friends is as narrow as a finger or as narrow as a palm, and a person on the steppe with friends is as wide as the steppe. And for those who don't know, the steppe is this thousands of kilometres of plains, deserts and mountains that stretch from Mongolia as far as the Danube River in Hungary. That was a lesson for me, in that I had to go out and make friends, find a way to make friends with the unfamiliar constantly. There's another great thing I learned in Kazakhstan, this concept of rushing slowly and not being dictated by human constructs of time, the 9 to 5, the Monday to Friday. Learning to be patient and to work with the seasons,
and time of the day.
The rise and fall of the sun. It was minus 52 in the winter. It was 40, 50 degrees in the summer. In the summer, you're riding at night to escape the heat. In the winter, you're trying to make the most of those short daylight hours just to survive and get to camp before you freeze to death.
So you really had to adjust
and constantly look for grass for the horses to keep them alive. And obviously, we haven't mentioned it, but one of the highlights of the whole journey was definitely meeting a lifelong four-legged friend, this tiny little pup who was given to me by a Kazakh man who said to me, you need a friend on this road, someone to keep you warm. And then he explained that in his culture, dogs choose their humans, and I was it. And I guess travelling with horses and with Tigan, it enabled me to kind of transcend the modern era and really understand this very ancient horseback culture. The nomads domesticated horses about 6,000 years ago, and have been riding back and forth across the steppe ever since, and of course introduced horses to the rest of the world. So to be free of roads, to be free of the mechanical era, gave me a deep insight into nomadic culture and life.
You faced a lot of challenges. The temperatures that you mentioned, from minus 50 something to plus 50 something, and from your documentary, I remember you were saying that you couldn't sleep all the way, like through the night. What was that like for you? Because it's not just when you go camping, you're just going for a couple of nights. You were doing it for 3 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a baptism of fire to start with, you know, having the horses stolen, and then I think only a couple of weeks later I was going to sleep, no, setting up the camp one night, and this howl came, and I thought that must be a dog, and then no, it came again, and it's clearly a wolf, and then another and another. I'd been warned that I should carry a gun, that wolves were really dangerous, but I didn't believe them. I thought they're just trying to scare me. But that night I got the fire going. I tried to stay up all night and keep the fire alive. And about 3 in the morning, these wolves just started howling quite close to my camp. There was just this blood-curdling feel in me that it's almost like this primordial response. And I was suddenly terrified of wolves.
Did you have plan of action?
Yeah, the plan of action was to keep the fire going, and also, according to one expert, they said just wee all around your camp.
Okay.
It'll keep the wolves away. I didn't have a gun. I did have an axe. From that point on, I realised I had to do something about wolves, and so in Kazakhstan I carried firecrackers.
Okay.
These in Russian, petardi. And I used to throw them out the tent door.
Yep. Before you went on your journey, did you anticipate the time frame? Like, did you know it would take you that long?
No, I'd imagined that on an Excel spreadsheet, it was very simple.
Yep.
20 k's a day, 5 days a week, get to Hungary in 16 months, 2 months of holidaying, back home, write the book, move on.
Tim, what was the most challenging part of your journey?
The most challenging part, I think, was different types of challenges, but there were lots of free stallions out there who were being very territorial, so I'd often be fending off stallions from attacking, have a pocket full of rocks or sticks, and if I slept in a tent I'd sleep with one eye open and just be chasing them all the time, and I really missed my family.
Yeah.
That sense of isolation was really difficult.
How did you deal with that? Like, did you have to talk to yourself?
Yeah, I found writing my diary was a very important thing, doing pieces to my video camera. I was making a documentary film as I went.
And you had Tegan, which...
And my animals. I used to put sunscreen on it after the sun went down, before night riding, because the smell or the scent of the sunscreen reminded me of times with family on the beach, back in Australia, and it just made me feel at ease a bit. So there were subtle ways that I could overcome that sense of isolation. But there were many other challenges. Bureaucracy was a really big one. One of the realities of the modern world is that horses are not a common form of transport. And so when I first arrived at the border of Kazakhstan and Russia, I tried to get into Russia. It turned out that you had to have a permit for either meat, live or packaged, or they had to be racehorses that were coming in for a transitory period of time and coming back. So I was forced to come back to Kazakhstan, but they wouldn't let me in. So I ended up being stuck in no man's land near a place called Astrakhan in the south. And eventually I was let back into Kazakhstan, and there began this 6-week ordeal of trying to get my passports and documents. And eventually I got a letter from the Department of Veterinary Transport on the border from Moscow. It was a fax that came through, and it said the horses are allowed to travel together with Tim Cope, and Tigan, my dog, can travel swoim-chodem, by his own feet, more or less. There were many other challenges. I think the biggest one was also the most unexpected, when I received the news while I was in Ukraine that my father Andrew had died.
I'm so sorry.
And he was in a car accident here in Gippsland, and so that kind of pulled the rug out from all of us. One of my brothers was in Chile studying in Santiago at the time, he came back, I left the horses, came back to Australia. It was my sister Natalie, my other brother John, and we spent a long time here at the property, just grieving and working out how do we move on. And I had to make that decision and draw the line. When do I go back to my horses? So eventually I did, and that last 1,000 kilometres of the trip, it was the easiest. There was no winter, or there was no desert to deal with, or thieves or anything like that, and it was easy to get food and water, but life felt acutely fragile.
What was the most enjoyable part of your journey?
I think the most enjoyable part, on one hand, was being out in the middle of this big, open, vast space. And for those who've never been to a place like that, the steppe can be in places pancake flat, a little bit of undulation, no trees in sight, no fences, and you have this feeling that suddenly there is no boundary. The only boundary is night and day. You're free to roam in whichever direction you please. No one knows where you are. And to be out there among all that with my family of horses and Tiggin brought a sense of joy and freedom and togetherness at the same time that it's hard to describe in words, but which I knew at the time would stick with me for the rest of my life. And the other most enjoyable thing about the trip was the flip side of that, which was riding into communities and making friends with people, whether it be over a cup of tea, 3 days of feasting. But there was a sense when you meet nomads in these more remote places that there's immediately a camaraderie, there's a shared moment in time that's not forgotten.
Tim, how do you come back from a journey like this and live a normal life?
Going through experiences like that and being in places like that and cultures, it changes you, and the door closes behind you as you step through into this other world, and there is no way back really. And you come back and everything here looks different than it used to. And so I had to find a way to make what I'd experienced relevant. And the way I've always done that is through my writing and by sharing my stories. So the way that I've managed to, if you like, bridge the divide between these worlds is by writing my book, which took 4 years, and doing presentations and making a documentary film.
Tim, what's next for you? Do you want to go on the road again? I know it's COVID times right now and it's a little bit difficult, but if there was no COVID?
I've got lots of dreams. I'd like to travel from India to Europe on the trail of the gypsies, the Roma people. I'd like to travel from here to Siberia on the migratory path of some of the birds, such as sandpipers, mutton birds that traverse the globe. I'd like to live as a nomad for 1 year in Mongolia. There's so many things I'd like to do.
Tim, in London you were made the Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. What does that mean?
For me it was just a wonderful feeling to have what I was doing recognised, and first and foremost I felt that my whole journey was a tribute to these nomadic cultures and these people, and it was a style of travel that, if you like, was an ode to a different time. And I think a lot of modern day adventure is more like using technology to take great steps and leaps forward and to push the boundaries. But for me, there's just so much in this world that we don't know about cultures and people, and so for them to have recognised me, it made me feel very, very proud that I had managed to tell the story of these nomadic cultures that most of us know nothing about.